from spending $80,000 on a luxury car now worth just $35,000, to investing that same $80,000 and watching it grow to $385,000. These are 7 investments that are keeping you PO. It sounds brilliant. You get a credit card with 0% interest for 12 months. You transfer your balance, buy what you need now, and pay nothing in interest. It feels like beating the system, like you've found the cheat code to managing money without consequences. And that is exactly how it is marketed. Use our balance transfer offer to consolidate debt. Finance your dream vacation interest-free. But behind all that shiny language is a subtle trap waiting to spring. Here's the emotional pull. For someone with a tight budget or a big purchase ahead, the idea of borrowing with 0 penalties feels like a lifeline. And for people trying to float their expenses while investing or waiting on income, it looks like smart arbitrage. It's not just tempting, it feels responsible. But here's the catch. The game is rigged for you to lose. Most 0% offers are in. Once the promotional period ends, the interest rate skyrockets often to 20% or more. Even worse, many cards are retroactive. If you don't pay it off in time, the company slaps you with back interest on the entire original balance. And don't forget the fees. Balance transfer fees usually hover around 3 to 5%. That's $150 to $250 just to move $5,000 around. Even before the clock starts ticking, let's look at someone who tried to play this game. Megan, a freelance designer from Portland, got a 0% APR card to pay for new equipment. She planned to pay it off within 12 months. But when 2 clients ghosted her and a surprise tax bill landed, she missed 3 payments. Suddenly her rate jumped to 24.99%, and she owed more than she started with. "I thought I was using the bank's money wisely," she said. "Instead, I was building a trap for myself." Compare that to how the wealthy play this game. They don't use 0% interest offers to survive. They use them to stretch liquidity. They take a no-interest loan, invest that cash into short-term high-yield vehicles or inventory with fast turnover, and pay it off before a single fee hits. They treat it like a business move, not a bailout. Want a better option? Build an emergency fund before you borrow. Use 0% offers only when you already have the money to pay them back. And if you're investing with borrowed funds, have a clear, time-bound plan and backup cash to cover the balance. Here is a number to chew on. If you paid $5,000 in credit card debt with 24% APR and only made minimum payments, you'd take over 11 years to pay it off and spend more than $6,000 just in interest. But if you invested that $5,000 in a conservative index fund over those same 11 years, earning 7% annually, you'd have over $10,500. That's a $16,500 swing, all hinging on how you treat free money. Comment trap if this one hit a little too close to home. And speaking of promises that sound too polished, let's talk about the glittery condo that might never exist. It's your home, your safe place, your biggest asset, and suddenly, the bank tells you you can borrow against it. It's called a home equity line of credit, or HELOC, and it feels like free money pulled straight from the walls of your house. The logic seems flawless. You've been paying down your mortgage, your home value went up. Why let that equity sit there doing nothing? Instead, you can access tens of thousands of dollars and use it for smart tuition, consolidating debt, even investing. Here's where it gets emotionally tricky. HELOCs don't feel like debt. They feel like recycling value. The bank isn't handing you someone else's money. It's unlocking your money. So when you install that new kitchen or fund your kid's college, it feels like financial wisdom. You didn't swipe a credit card, you leveraged your success. But let's talk risk. Unlike credit card debt, HELOCs are secured. If you default, the bank doesn't just chase you down, they take your home. The very asset you build equity in can be used against you. And that low interest rate, it's usually variable, meaning one Fed hike can double your payments without warning. Worse yet, during economic downturns, banks have been known to freeze HELOCs, instantly locking you out of your own funds. So if you're counting on that equity line for an emergency and the market crashes, you're stuck with no access and a payment due. Let's look at Sam, a middle manager in Phoenix. He took out a $50,000 HELOC to renovate his home, assuming the improved value would outpace the debt. But halfway through construction, interest rates spiked, his payment doubled, and his contractor found mold that blew the budget wide open. 2 years later, he sold the home at a loss because he had no choice. "I thought I was upgrading my life," he said, "but I was just gambling with my foundation." Now, compare that to how the wealthy use home equity. They don't tap it for lifestyle upgrades. They treat it like a lever, a bridge loan for a flip property, a low-cost buffer for tax-advantaged investments. And always with buffers in place, they have cash elsewhere to protect the asset. They never borrow because they need to. They borrow because it creates spread. So what's the better move for the average person? Use HELOCs only for wealth-producing moves with a clear return on investment. Not kitchens, not weddings, and definitely not vacations. Track every dollar you borrow, set a hard repayment schedule, and never use the full credit line. If you can't pay it back within 5 years, you're not leveraging your bleeding equity. Let's run the numbers. Imagine you tap $40,000 from your HELOC at 7% interest for home upgrades. Over 10 years, That's more than $15,000 in interest. But if you invested that same $40,000 into a rental property with an 8% annual return, compounded, you'd have nearly $90,000 in the same time frame and you'd still have your equity intact. But if you think borrowing against your own home is risky, wait until you hear how people are starting businesses with someone else's money, and no backup plan. It starts with ambition. You've got an idea, a plan, and a fire in your belly. But what you don't have is capital. So, like millions of hopeful entrepreneurs, you take out a business loan. It's an investment in myself. You tell your friends, debt is just part of the hustle. And on the surface, that's true. Almost every major company today, from Starbucks to Tesla, started with borrowed money. The idea that you can use debt to grow something bigger is powerful, almost romantic. It's the American dream. But here's where it flips. For most people, a business loan isn't leverage. It's a ticking time bomb. The emotional hook is clear. You're chasing freedom. You want to leave your job, call your own shots, and build something meaningful. Borrowing money feels like a courageous step toward independence. But in reality, many people are borrowing their way into financial prison just wearing an entrepreneur badge on the door. Let's hit some hard facts. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 45% of small businesses failed within the first 5 years. Add debt to that equation, and the fallout gets worse. A failed business is hard. A failed business with $100,000 in debt is catastrophic. And banks don't care about your dreams. They care about repayment. Miss a few payments and you're dealing with personal guarantees, asset seizures, and credit destruction that can haunt you for a decade. Now consider Chris, a 33-year-old from Chicago. He left his job to start a coffee shop, taking out a $75,000 SBA loan. He budgeted for equipment, rent, and marketing, but not for a 30% drop in foot traffic during winter. 6 months in, cash flow dried up, and loan payments didn't stop. The business folded after 11 months. Chris now works 2 jobs just to make his monthly debt. "I didn't just lose my dream," he said. "I mortgaged my future for it." Meanwhile, the wealthy approach business debt with a different mindset. They don't borrow to build dreams, they borrow to scale proof. They only take on debt when the product is validated, the demand is measured, and the cash flow can support it. Their motto: debt should accelerate momentum, not replace it. So what's the better strategy? Start small. Validate first. Use personal savings or micro-investment to test the waters. Build a revenue stream before you build a brand. And only take a loan when you're already winning, not to start winning. Let's play it out. Say you borrow $100,000 at 8% over 10 years to fund your dream. Subscribe if you've ever justified a $1,000 purchase by calling it an investment. Because if you think business debt is risky, wait until we step into the casino of Wall Street, where regular people borrow to buy stocks and don't realize they're playing against the house. It feels like a financial power move. You're not just investing your money, you're investing with borrowed capital. That's called margin. And for a moment, it feels like you've unlocked Wall Street's secret elevator. Here's the promise. You deposit $10,000, and your broker lets you trade with $20,000. If your investment goes up by 10%, you don't just make $1,000, you make $2,000. That's double the gain. What could go wrong? Plenty. Margin is the emotional equivalent of financial steroids. It gives you a temporary rush, inflated strength, and the illusion of invincibility. But just like steroids, the crash is brutal. Let's start with the facts. Margin debt in the US reached $650 billion in recent years. But it only takes a 30% drop in your investment's value to trigger a margin call, which forces you to sell your positions, often at a loss, to cover the borrowed money. And that sale isn't optional. It's instant, brutal, and done without your consent. Take Ryan from Denver, a 28-year-old crypto trader who used $25,000 of his own cash and borrowed another $25,000 on margin to buy into tech stocks in early 2022. When the market dipped, he was down 20% in a week. Then came the call. He was forced to liquidate everything, locking in a $19,000 loss. "I thought I was accelerating my portfolio," he said. "I ended up back at zero." Meanwhile, wealthy investors use margin differently. They're not buying meme stocks or chasing hype. They use margin on blue-chip investments with long-term upside and minimal volatility. And most importantly, they always have liquid reserves ready in case the market turns. For them, margin isn't a gamble, it's controlled leverage. Here's a smarter play. Instead of borrowing to double your exposure, focus on increasing your actual investing capacity. Build up capital gradually. Use cash to buy into quality assets during dips, not at peaks. And if you do use margin, treat it like nitroglycerin, only use when absolutely necessary, and always with protective measures in place. Want a clearer picture? If you invest $50,000 of your own money and earn 8% annually, you'll have over $108,000 in 10 years. But if you invest $50,000 with another $50,000 in borrowed margin and the market drops just 20%, your entire portfolio could be wiped out, and you'd still owe the broker. But if you think gambling on stocks with debt is aggressive, wait until you see what happens when people do the same thing with entire houses. It's the golden formula. Buy property with a small down payment. Let tenants pay the mortgage. Build equity while collecting rent. Real estate leverage is hailed as the ultimate wealth-building move. And when done right, it absolutely is. But when done wrong, it becomes a slow-motion financial collapse disguised as progress. The emotional hook is real. You've heard the podcasts. You've seen the gurus use opium other people's money. The idea of building a real estate empire with minimal capital feels like beating the system. You imagine a life of passive income, early retirement, and properties paying for properties. But leverage cuts both ways. When you finance a rental property, you're not just taking on mortgage debt, you're committing to taxes, maintenance, insurance, vacancies, and market shifts. And unless you're buying in cash flow positive areas with a long-term view, you're not investing. You're speculating. Take the 2021 to 2022 real estate boom. Investors bought up properties at record prices using low-interest loans, assuming rents would keep rising. But in 2023, as interest rates climbed, rental demand shifted, property taxes soared, and suddenly, many passive income properties became monthly liabilities. Let's meet Jerome, a 41-year-old in Atlanta. He refinanced his primary home to buy 2 rental properties at 5% down. For a while, rent covered the basics. Then one tenant left, the other stopped paying, and a surprise plumbing issue drained his reserves. 6 months later, he was paying 3 mortgages, all out of pocket. I didn't feel like a landlord, he said. I felt like I was working for the properties. Now contrast that with how wealthy investors use leverage. They don't just look at the price, they run the numbers ruthlessly. Will this property cash flow even at 8% interest? Can it sit vacant for 3 months without bleeding? Will appreciation still make sense if the market slows? For them, leverage is math, not hope. So what's the better approach? Start with conservative underwriting. Buy only when the property produces cash flow, after all expenses and reserves. Avoid over-leveraging. 20 to 25% down is safer. And never assume appreciation. Instead, build in margin for error, long vacancies, surprise repairs, rate hikes. Here's a financial snapshot. Let's say you put 5% down on a $400,000 rental, just $20,000. If property taxes go up or rent drops slightly, you could lose $500 to $800 per month. But if you had invested that $20,000 into a diversified REIT portfolio returning 7% annually, you'd have around $39,000 in 10 years without managing tenants or toilets. And if you think real estate leverage is complicated, wait until you see how billionaires make money by becoming the bank themselves and collecting profits while staying completely in the shadows. It sounds like something reserved for hedge funds and offshore trusts, private credit, structured loans, and debt arbitrage. But it's not just for the ultra-wealthy anymore. More and more affluent investors are playing lender, using their capital to collect returns off your debt. Here's how it works. Instead of putting money into stocks or real estate, they lend it out through private debt markets at interest rates far higher than banks offer. They fund business loans, real estate deals, or even personal lines of credit, often secured by collateral. The borrower pays 10, 12, even 15%, and the lender sits back and collects. It's seductive. You're no longer the one begging for credit, you are the credit. You become the house instead of the player. And when done right, the returns can be incredibly attractive with relatively low correlation to market swings. But here's the problem. Most people don't understand how risky this really is. Private credit isn't insured. It's a lick. And when a deal goes south, you're not just looking at red numbers on a screen, you're in court, chasing repayments, tied up in legal fees, or worse, eating a total loss. Let's talk about Jen, a high-income professional who put $100,000 into a private lending platform targeting small business loans. The returns were promised at 14% annually. For the first year, everything looked great. Then one business defaulted, then 2, and suddenly the platform froze. With 3 years later, she's recovered less than 40% of her original investment. I thought I was doing what the banks do, she said. But I forgot banks have lawyers, risk models, and I just had a login screen. Wealthy investors still use private credit, but with strict rules. They never invest more than 5 to 10% of their portfolio in it. They vet deals personally or through trusted advisors, and they build senior position loans, meaning if things collapse, they get paid first, not last. Want a better move? If you're going to enter private credit, do it with excess capital, not core savings. Start with highly rated debt funds or peer-to-peer lending with strict credit filters. And understand, this is not passive income, this is active risk disguised as monthly interests. Let's run a simple comparison. A $50,000 investment in a private debt deal at 12% sounds great until the borrower defaults. You could lose the full $50,000, but if that same amount sat in a diversified bond fund earning a modest 5%, you'd still have nearly $82,000 after 10 years, with significantly less stress. It's the ultimate power move. You build massive wealth, but instead of selling your assets and paying taxes, you borrow against them. No capital gains, no income tax, just low-interest bank loans, backed by your billions. To most people, that sounds like science fiction. But 2. It's standard practice. Here's the illusion. Debt is bad. We're taught that from childhood. You pay it off as fast as possible, avoid it when you can, and breathe easier when it's gone. But for billionaires, debt is freedom. Because if you never sell your assets, you'll never trigger taxes, and if you borrow against them, you unlock cash without ever giving up ownership. Here's how it works. Say you own $100 million in stock. Selling it would create a massive tax bill. But if you instead borrow $50 million against it at 3% interest, you get access to the cash, and the interest might even be tax deductible. You spend, invest, expand, and pay nothing in capital gains. Meanwhile, your assets keep growing. This is what's called buy, borrow, die. You buy appreciating assets. You borrow against them to access liquidity, and when you die, the assets transfer to your heirs with a stepped-up cost basis, erasing the tax burden entirely. Let's look at Elon Musk. In 2021, before selling any stock, Musk had borrowed billions against his Tesla shares. He used those funds for real estate, investments, and even startup financing, all while paying almost no taxes. And he's not alone. This strategy is quietly used by nearly every tech billionaire, real estate mogul, and legacy wealth holder in America. Meanwhile, middle-class families take out personal loans at 12% interest just to fix a roof or pay off a credit card. So what's the lesson here? It's not that you should copy the billionaires. It's that you should understand how debt can either enslave or empower you, depending on how you use it. Strategic debt requires assets, planning, and discipline. Blind debt used to fund lifestyle is a wealth killer. If you have $2 million in appreciated assets and sell them, you might owe $400,000 plus in taxes. But if you borrow $1 million against them at 4% interest, your annual cost is just $40,000 and you keep your investments intact and growing. It's a completely different financial world. So, no, debt isn't always bad. In the right hands, it's a tool, a shield. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a shackle with invisible links made of interest, illusion, and financial pressure dressed up as progress. Your wallet will thank you for watching this one next.